Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Not so much a glorious day here in Melbourne today, a little bit grey, not cold, but grey, and it's only going to be more like that as we head towards winter. So I'm pleased to hear that it's nice and sunny over your part of the world. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's wonderful to be here. Tom and I are not 100% sure how long our I guess discussion will go for before we do open it up for questions. We thought that we would start with I guess an overview of our work, our papers, our chapters, and some of the upcoming work we have, but also in doing that talk about the broader themes that we're exploring when we look at the game and sport of cricket, and indeed the new forms and formats of that. Um, so Tom and I have been writing about a sport for quite some time. We're writing a book on the Olympics, which is keeping us very important through a sort of socio-cultural lens, and within that, continuing our work on some of our favourite sports and topics, cricket and 2020 being one of them. One of the papers, which I guess, and I'll probably introduce things by the way, contextualize things, provide that theoretical lens and that philosophical lens as per the paper that I know was circulated, and then hand over to Tom, who will give a more, I guess, or expound the theory through the evidence, really, when it comes to the BBL and 2020 cricket in general. The paper that was published in Sport Ethics and Philosophy, which I know was circulated to everyone, I'm not sure whether people have had the chance to read it. That was actually inspired by a chapter that Tom Heenan wrote, branded like Ben Simmons. And I think it was branded like Ben Simmons, Gen F, F being franchise, and the Americanisation of Australian cricket. And there was a particular section in that chapter that I guess struck a chord with me in particular. Tom was describing what he'd seen on television, a young boy wearing green. Green is the colour of the Melbourne Stars in the Big Bash League, who had just basically choked, if you like, in the Big Bash final, losing 7 for 19 against their, well, I was going to say crosstown rivals, but that would then suggest that there is some sort of geography and relevance to geography when it comes to these brands. So I will just say the other team that's located here in Melbourne, the Melbourne Renegades. And he wrote that the boy was crying. And Tom wrote that his tears were shed for a brand without a place or tradition. And I found that really interesting. I just thought, maybe this child or this boy is crying because his team's lost, and kids do that sometimes. But the deeper meaning behind it, this idea that these were brands not really connected with place or tradition, struck a chord with me, and I thought deserved further inquiry. And thus, I turned my attention with Tom to write this reasonably philosophical chapter exploring, I guess, the meaning of sport, and actually asking, what should sport offer? What should it be? What should it represent? What is lost if it's entertainment and entertainment only? I mean, is there really anything wrong with that? As Tom will explain, 2020 cricket, Big Bash cricket, has been developed by marketers and targeted to the market, packaged as entertainment and sold as entertainment. In Tom's chapter, he talks about people at Cricket Australia saying nobody really cares if their teams win or lose. It's simply all about the entertainment. And so the bigger question for me is, does that matter? What should sport be? What should culture be? If sport is considered an item of culture, what should it offer us, and what is lost if it is simply entertainment? And so we explored that through the lens of Adorno and Horkheimer, who, as some of you might know, are Frankfurt School theorists, critical theorists who wrote about culture And a lot of their work became preeminent, if you like. Enlightenment as mass deception, probably one of their most famous works, formed the theoretical model for this exploration. And they basically argue that culture, and if we consider sport as an item of culture, should offer a lot more than entertainment. In fact, they railed against the idea that it should be entertainment. They believed it should offer variety and even intellectual stimulation. It should lead to meaningful participation, meaningful engagement, even debate. And it should reflect the people who are playing, the people who are watching, the communities and societies from which the sports emerge, and indeed within which they exist. And that was very interesting to me because I think Test cricket can certainly offer that. I think it does offer that. It's an old game, and as we know, it is a game based on the battle between bat and ball that can go over 5 days and be a test of skill and concentration and technique and strategy and resilience and whatever conditions are thrown up on any given day for a full day or any given test for a full 5 days. And we know that playing in different countries can throw up different conditions. It can impact teams significantly. I mean, we only need to look at this summer's Ashes series here in Australia. No matter how poorly it seemed Australia was going in the lead in, or how well the English might be going, we know that in Australia, for whatever reason, it's a different kettle of fish. And I'm sure it's the same in the UK. I've not been fortunate enough to go over for an English-based Ashes, but here in Australia, people absolutely rally behind Test cricket when the Ashes is on. Not necessarily any other time or many other times, but certainly, absolutely and wholeheartedly when the Ashes are on. And so it's very interesting to me, and was interesting to me then, that this wonderful game, this elongated game that is not perfectly, packaged and sold for television audiences. It doesn't neatly fit into a 3-hour block in prime time. There are no superhero monikers and colourful uniforms. There are no pyrotechnics when a 4 or a 6 is hit. It is just the game as we know it, and yet it captures everybody, well, those that are interested in looking, in a way that few other sports here in Australia can, and certainly other forms of the game. But then, of course, and Tom will speak to this in more detail, we've had the rise of the Big Bash. And this came about due to a shrinking audience and market share for Cricket Australia. And it came about by reviews conducted by people connected with other sports, such as the Australian Football League. And it's modelled off, yes, other, at 2020 and 100 versions around the world. But this is essentially a sport created by marketers, packaged and sold back to the consumers. And if indeed Adorno and Horkheimer are correct that sport as culture should stimulate variety, should encourage difference in terms of form and makeup, if it should encourage intellectual stimulation and a significant cognitive, engagement, if it should stimulate meaningful participation and discussions with other fans, then it can be strongly argued that T20 cricket does almost the opposite of that. It is, no matter what we see in those 3 hours, very formulaic, extremely templated, and based on models that have existed for some time, as Tom highlighted in his chapter, in America. In fact, Cricket Australia consulted with Americans to develop the entertainment package that is 2020 cricket, the Big Bash League. And so it is that we might be sold ideas that this is new and different, and there's lots of flashpoints, and it provides instant gratifications. But indeed, it is a far more simplified, standardized, formulaic, templated version of the game. And again, the question is, what is the problem with that, I guess, and how does it happen? Now, in terms of how does it happen, we drew on Joseph Schumpeter and his idea of creative destruction. This whole idea that in capitalism, and for capitalism to work, that it continually needs to renew. And it does this by breaking down and corrupting, if you like, old structures to create new ways of making money and profit. And so that's what we're seeing essentially with cricket here in Australia and around the world. Traditional forms of the game often being undermined or often being dismantled so that new forms, new products can be created and sold to cricket fans. And all the while we're told by marketers and advertisers alike that this is great, that this is fantastic, that this is better than the previous game or different or at the very least equally good. But I guess in our article we argue that's where the deception kicks in. That is where the deception lies, where we have to think critically and ask ourselves, is it better? And how is it better? Or is it very standardized? Is it very formulaic? Is it an entertainment product? Is it such that, it is not actually a better form of the game? Deception is at play. And this is part of the 21st century, and this is part of capitalism, where items of product are no longer necessarily created by the people, but rather they are created by marketers or the culture industry, and they are packaged and they are sold back to us as products that we should indeed consume. And I guess that goes to the next point. What is wrong with this? And again, if we go back to Adorno and Horkheimer and argue that it really should, it being sport and culture, should provide variety and should provide intellectual stimulation and should connect us and should provide us with some sense of meaning or connection beyond entertainment, then does mass-produced culture, and, Big Bash can be seen as mass-produced, standardized, templated culture, does that merely lead to conspicuous consumption, where we don't have to think too hard, we don't have to invest too much, we don't actually care whether our team wins or loses, but I'm busy, I work a lot of hours, I've got kids, I don't want anything too demanding, I don't want anything too consuming. So again, if Adorno and Horkheimer does suggest that culture reflects the people, perhaps Big Bash does reflect us here in 2026. Too busy to invest in time, effort and energy. So the Big Bash will do just fine on a Tuesday night in the summer. Finally, we also look at, I'll go to Tom, who can speak more broadly, I guess, to some of these changes in detail, but we looked at how that impacts play. Like, how has play changed? We looked at Johan Hiesinger, who was a play cultural observer, historian, more than a theorist. But he observed that, play should be fun and it should be free. Now, we know in professional sport it's not always fun and it's not always free, but in the Big Bash, are you free to play how you want, or is it dictated that you will play a certain way? Because fours and sixes, aggressive risk-taking, ramp shots and other things are what's going to keep you in the team, and, slow and steady no longer wins the race. So does it also have implications for play in cricket? There's some of the major themes that we looked at, but again, it was very much inspired by a more practical observation and history of the Big Bash, which was written by Tom. And so, given I've contextualized, I guess, the theory and philosophy around why this matters, why it matters that sports evolve and transition and transform, I'll go to Tom, who can add his thoughts, but also talk about the creation of the Big Bash, the rise in momentum, the falls and troughs that it's had, but the current state that it's in now, having picked up over the last couple of years, and now with a heightened debate around whether the game should go forward and the competition go forward with privatised teams. Tom, I'll hand over to you.
Well, a couple of months ago, I decided to go back and revisit the Big Bash after all this and what's occurred since the pandemic. And it's come out at about 80,000 words. And part of that is privatisation and what that means. And you could actually say the Indianisation of Australian cricket. The point that Sam makes, and one of the the real critical theorist in this is Schumpeter and creative destruction. When the Big Bash came in, it came in because of a changing demographic in Australia. Australia has become increasingly multicultural. There was a view from Cricket Australia that the demographic that watches Test cricket was pretty much the same view that occurred with the 100. It was male, white, and aging, and Test cricket would eventually fade out. Well, it probably won't. But we needed something that would attract another demographic, and that demographic was families, it was women and children. And there is always this perception about the short attention span, and this is what it was designed to do. Nothing to go over 3 hours. Of course, the short attention span is also about primetime television that fits into 3-hour blocks. So you can see what's happening here. The other thing that Sam brings out is the Big Bash, as with most modern sport, and we'll see it tomorrow with the enhanced games, is about product placement. It's about advertising. You are not left alone to communicate with anybody. You have flashing screens up. You have superheroes. That is all being consciously done through marketeers in America. And one of the companies is Property Consulting Group in Chicago and a guy called Dan McGuello. McGuello was approached by Cricket Australia in around about 2008. They went over there. Cricket Australia had meetings with the Dallas Cowboys, Portland Timberwolves, saw entertainment companies. When McGuello came to Australia, he made a really interesting, he went to a one-day international and he noted, if you were going to attract families, why do you shut a place that sells ice cream and keep a bar open that basically serves men? You are actually alienating the people you were trying to attract to the game. And this forced Cricket Australia to confront something that they really had to attract women to the games. If you want to see why we have a women's Big Bash in Australia, yes, there's such a thing as gender equity, but there's also such a thing as the women's market that was completely underrepresented in the game, and it didn't see itself on a cricket field. Now, Australian women see themselves on soccer pitches. The Matildas are arguably the most marketable sporting team in Australia, and the Australian women's cricket team is really highly regarded. And again, part of that was the way in which Australian men played cricket, which wasn't popular, and particularly after the Argus review in about 2012, in which a real hard-edged Australian team came in. And it was evident in the South African series when David Warner and Quentin de Kock had almost a punch-up in a corridor in South Africa. It was an ugly Australian team. It went against what the Big Bash was trying to do and get women and children involved. So Cricket Australia, go ahead with this new marketing campaign. But behind it is something about governance. And it was to shift and give a financial base for the privatisation of certain aspects of Australian cricket. And it came out in a 2012 review titled Good Governance in Australian Cricket that was authored by two fellows, David Crawford and Colin Carter, who was connected with Australian football. The character there that is the main character is Crawford. Crawford is arguably, in the last 20 years, the most important figure in Australian sport. He is behind the corporatisation of Australian Football League. He is behind the corporatisation of Australian soccer. His report recommended the privatisation of the Big Bash and the getting rid of the federated structure that controls Australian cricket, in which you have state associations reporting to a board and a CEO in charge of that board. For most of the 2010s, it was James Sutherland. Crawford wanted to do away with that and put a commission in place. And this is extremely important given the current impasse in Australian cricket, where Mike Baird, the current chairman, and Todd Greenberg, the current CEO, are trying to push through privatisation and are being blocked by two state associations. And it appears that it will go through incrementally. Now, this was a problem in 2012. It is still a problem. But in terms of what Sam was saying, it was always about getting a superhero into the stadium. You wanted a Marvel character. You wanted a Tonka truck. It wasn't just a game. What was happening here was you had a cricket match in the middle of an entertainment package, and that seems to me, anybody who's been to American sport and caught a flying T-shirt at an NBA game, you know what you're getting at. This is about entertainment. You're watching nothing else, and the timeouts are there to maximise the advertising space. Now, when it came to privatisation initially, there were a couple of things, a couple of question marks about it. And one of them was the external owners. You lose control of what you are producing. The other thing that is very important, Cricket Australia is a not-for-profit organisation. It pays no tax. If it privatises, it pays tax. So therefore, there's a question mark about that. That question mark currently is not being addressed by either Baird or Greenberg. The other thing is, will Cricket Australia, when you look at, and the 100 here, I believe the 100 has 4 Indian investors in it, do you actually have the BBL as an offshoot of the IPL? And is this what we're moving at in cricket, where you have a dominant form of capitalism in the game, a dominant form that is more cashed up than any other, with the exception of the UK, probably in certain quarters. But this form of capitalism will be the form of capitalism that begins to dominate cricket and has dominated cricket. And that form of capitalism actually protects its labour market, because Cricket Australia would love to have an Indian player and has had an Indian player in the BBL, but a very minor Indian player. It got Ashwin last year or the year before, but Ashwin was injured, but Ashwin had to retire and was 40 years old. Now, it protects its labour market. And you can argue it will not, despite investment in South Africa, despite investment in the United Arab Emirates, let Indian players go. But in the United Arab Emirates, we'll recruit the 9 international players teams need to form a competition from other sources, particularly Australia, where I think at one point 22 players were listed to play in the UAE. Now, this is important for Australia because currently, and this is post-pandemic, you have a competition that has a salary cap far in excess of the Big Bash. The Big Bash cannot compete with the United Arab Emirates International T20 League. Now, when you think about that and Indian money going into it, there is a problem for the Big Bash. The Big Bash, there was and I know I'm talking to an English audience, there was a remarkable comment about if our prime signing is Ben Duckett, we're in trouble. And with all due respect to Duckett, I thought he did a good job in that Melbourne Test, bringing victory home to the English, who I was barracking for at the time. You see the problem. We're not getting a Ben Stokes. Stokes hasn't played in the Big Bash since 2015. We're not even getting a Pat Cummins. We're not getting a Mitchell Stark. We're not getting a Hazelwood. And part of the reason is the Big Bash has nowhere to go in the summer. The formats in Australia cannibalise themselves. Test cricket takes the major players. There is then, after the Sydney Test in January, a 2-week window when a Smith can play in the Big Bash. Now, that takes the Australian player out. The Cricket Australia get out of this by saying, well, we never really needed big names because we actually had a very successful competition anyway. The success of the competition is very interesting. It goes up. It gets its main start when it moves from pay television to free-to-air television in about 2013. That's when audiences go up. That's when crowds go up. And that's when Cricket Australia does something that actually brings the game down. It extends the season from December, early December, through to the end of January. Now, that fits in with the school holiday season. It doesn't fit in with what major players actually want, which is a 3-week month block in which they play in a country, get out of the country. In Australia, it's a 7-week block, and it limits who comes to this country. It also means that when the United Arab Emirates come online or South Africa come online, a player will play 4 games in the Big Bash and fulfill his contract in the United Arab Emirates for much more money. Again, it goes down to the salary caps, what players are paid, etc. What Cricket Australia did a number of years ago was introduce the draft system for international players, and they had a platinum, gold, silver, and bronze system of payment, anywhere from $430,000 for a season down to about $100,000 for a bronze player. Now, people like Ponting, who was coaching the Hobart Hurricanes at the times, and a few others, said that, well, we don't want players, name players, coming in and just being brands. We want players who are going to play the whole season. And so platinum players weren't picked up at first because they were seen as just nuisance value. They were going to play the first half of the season and vacate for richer takings in the UAE and not play in the finals. And this was a constant. And so there was a difference between how players and coaches saw the game as a game to win and how the marketeers at Cricket Australia saw the game, which was a game to promote and promote it through big name players. It's been consistent. The draft has attracted second-rate players because it has a payment or a salary rate far below other major competitions. A fellow like Mitchell Starc has not played in the BBL for ages. He took up a $4.4 million contract with the IPL and has now prolonged his Test career through not playing T20 cricket. Cummins has played against Smith in T20 cricket. Peter Layla has a marvellous account of when they met in the IPL. Smith lasted 5 balls, and that was about the only time that Cummins has bowled to Smith in T20 cricket, and it happened in another country. You begin to see the problem. There is one cricketer or 3 cricketers who were very important to the IPL. The first is Chris Lynn, who never played for Australia, but was or is the highest run scorer in the BBL. Now, Lynn a couple of years ago fell out with the Brisbane Heat and went to play for the Adelaide Strikers. And the contract was really interesting because Lynn had been uncontracted by Cricket Australia since 2019. So it was free to go wherever he wanted. What Lynn did was he got an agreement with the Strikers where he could play about 4 games and then go and play in the UAE for the remainder of the season. Again, you see the problem. If the Strikers get into a final, they don't have their major player because he's playing in another market. The other player is Steve Smith. Smith was contracted to Sydney Sixers. There was a dispute between the Seven West Network, Foxtel, and Cricket Australia over the quality of the content, which went to the federal court in Australia. One of the things that was central to that contract or that contest in court was that Australian players weren't on the park in the BBL. We had inferior content, and the head of the Seven Network said we may as well go and film a grade game. Now, Smith was central to that. Smith was denied during the pandemic the right to play in a final at the Sydney Cricket Ground, which would have added much to the ratings. Seven were furious that they didn't have Smith on the park. Smith then stood out. When Smith comes back, he negotiates a settlement to play in the BBL, which challenges the whole structural pay arrangement, the platinum, gold, silver, bronze arrangement. Smith is paid above that rate at about $800,000 as a marketing step. He's paid out of the marketing budget. The other big character and probably the most significant cricketer in Australia since Warne, and we haven't even touched on Warnie's contribution to the BBL, which was significant. He did pick a fight with Marlon Samuels, is David Warner. Now, Warner under Lehman was the absolute attack dog of Australian cricket. He was suspended from any leadership position in Australian cricket after Sandpaper Gate. Such was Cricket Australia's endeavours to get Warner back to the BBL that it actually rescinded that decision and said, yes, Dave, you can lead the Sydney Thunder. What Warner brought to that, and Sam and I have discussed this, when he came back into the BBL, he arrived by helicopter. He had been to his brother's wedding in the Hunter Valley north of Sydney, and the helicopter landed symbolically almost near a logo of Farewell Davey, which was there for a week after his last test at the Sydney Cricket Ground. Warner stepped out of the helicopter. Looking on was the fast bowler Sean Abbott, and Abbott made a comment to the press. He's all Hollywood, isn't he? Well, in actual fact, Warner was all Bollywood. Warner's money comes from the IPL. The significant thing about Warner is that he too was able to negotiate well above the platinum payment at about $800,000. And again, it was that marketing contract. And it led to Cricket Australia bringing in play, signing test players onto a $50,000 marketing arrangement and paying them $30,000 per game if they played in the BBL. Now, the current state of the BBL, it's the privatisation impasse is still going on. Two states have stepped out. One state, the New South Wales Cricket Association, have suggested that if Cricket Australia wants any revenue, they get it from gaming. Go into betting. That's where you'll get the revenue from. Mike Baird is a Christian. He doesn't see any sense in this at all. It's against his morals, and Greenberg just sees it as poor marketing. What they are suggesting, Cricket Australia and Greenberg and in particular, is a hybrid model will come in of partial privatisation, partial state ownership at this stage. But the push by Cricket Australia, particularly Greenberg in the long run, is to bring in total privatisation. Now, what this means is when you look at the suitors who may be involved in this, it's essentially Indian money. So again, and this is the really interesting point. Years ago, somebody wrote, well, cricket's the only game where we're seeing the old colonial structure go and the periphery is coming to control the game. Well, the periphery is well and truly alive in Australia, because one of the really interesting things about this country now is the level of South Asian involvement from the grassroots level, and it hasn't yet hit the elite level of South Asian players, particularly Indian players. When in a World Cup T20 game, you can get 85,000 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground watching Zimbabwe play India, and less watching an Australian game against another opposition, there is a significant shift in the Australian population. The other thing about this, and it came up through working with the Victorian Police on basically sport corruption, and it was due to research done on D Company and Dawood Ibrahim in India and the control of illegal gambling markets in India. When it comes to governance, this is something that is never discussed at all. During the World Cup in 2016 in Australia, it was estimated that 340 Indian bookmakers had entered the country, and all of them were followed by police. They arrived, they sat behind them at the ground, whatever. And this is one aspect that is just shied away from. And when you consider the level of Indian betting money, the money that is easily transferred across borders because of a Hawala network that is washed through the United Arab Emirates and has ended up in British real estate, you see that there is a substantial money to be made from spot fixing. And as somebody said to me in WADA a couple of years ago, if you think the Peloton doesn't dope, you're kidding yourself. It may be that we have a similar case here. That is another topic for discussion. But if you look at the Big Bash, and I've probably prattled on for too much, it is with us whether we like it or not. It is about marketing. But the funny thing I find now, after watching American baseball, it has many of the same skills that you will see on a baseball field, including the removal of the left foot to allow the hitter to get more power. And the other thing about it is, when I looked at the World Cup, the use of batsmen as pinch hitters towards an end of an innings. And I think that this is the really interesting side of the Big Bash and the change of skills. And I'll just leave you with one thought. If cricket is creative destruction, and we've really dumbed down the game, what is the next form of creative destruction? And it strikes me from watching YouTube and looking at games in India and Pakistan that it's take ball cricket. It is a form of the game in which anybody can play. You are not excluded. And it's a form of the game that actually has given us so much, including the ram shot and some marvellous swing bowling. And it may be that if you're looking at cricket as an Olympic sport, this could be the way to go. So I've prattled on for too long. I'll hand back to Jeremy.
Sam, Tom, thank you very much. Really, really fascinating stuff, and I really enjoyed both your papers. Partly because I agreed with so much of it, and it kind of, I guess, it helped me to think about a lot of random thoughts I've had over the years, and you articulated things so well and so well evidenced. So we're going to throw it open for discussion and questions, and maybe I could start by raising something that occurred to me in the course of reading your papers. A couple of years ago, ACS published one of the great cricket historian Eric Midwinter's last books, called Cricket's Revolution, and Eric's last sentence in that was, I think, a repeat of a point that he'd made previously, which was that it was very hard to sustain red ball cricket in a white ball society, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I think I guess what to me that sort of raises is the idea that a lot of what you've been talking about and the sort of the trends that you've identified, there's a certain inevitability about it. And I suppose to me it begs the question, why should cricket be able to buck those trends? And one of the things I'm sort of particularly interested in is isn't part of the problem that the way the game has been run, for decades has left it extremely vulnerable to takeover. And I guess I'm sort of playing devil's advocate here, but I mean, you could see the history of cricket since, say, the Second World War as a sort of history of complacency, as people turned away from the game and did other things, with lots of other things that they were able to do, and not just complacency, but delay in tackling the causes of decline. So, for example, in the 1950s, crowds declined dramatically over the course of the 1950s. And yet, we're talking in England in particular, took to 1963 for the One Day Cup, 1969 for the John Player League. Millions were lost to the game over that period. And the game, the way the administrators did very little or didn't appear to know how to respond to that. And then I'm sort of thinking later on, this sort of amateurism around the handling of the 1999 World Cup in England. I mean, there was a sort of famous TV personality that Annika Rice was involved in the publicity, and famously at a press conference, that cricket was more boring than fishing, which wasn't really a way to try and sell the game. Then we've had the short-termism, say in 2005, when after the Ashes, possibly the greatest series of the last 20 or 30 years, it went behind a paywall. So there's sort of been you could point the finger really at those that have been running the game, and at the end of that, as a result of that, and you say it in your paper towards, I think it's the conclusion of the chapter, national and regional boards jumped on the T20 gravy train, without much thought for the impact. And part of the reason for that, if I assume that the situation was similar in Australia to England, was just desperation to find a way of making the game pay, because they'd failed to market the product that they love over such a long period of time. So I suppose my question to you really is, I may be being overly cynical, but I'm not sure I am. I just wondered to what extent you feel that those responsible for administering Australian cricket in a similar period, going back decades, are equally sort of culpable for the sort of fragility of the game and the fact that it's so easily been overtaken by the kind of initiatives and the kind of organizations and companies and the nature of the product which you've described. You know, is that has the was the sort of long form game and the state game, was it just ripe for takeover?
I just jump in here, Sam, because I want to bury a ghost. If you look at Packer and you want to see the rise of Packers, look at Bradman. And Bradman was twice chair of the Australian board. When you look at what Chappell tried to negotiate with Packer and the players tried to negotiate, he left it open for Packer to walk straight in. And the short-sightedness of that was just remarkable when it was quite easily solvable. When you look at the Big Bash, they immediately saw a cash cow. But the dumbness of the administrators was they saw it as a great moment of greed. So what they did was they extended the season from about 39 games to nearly 60, and they killed it. Broadcast attendances went down, interest dropped, and you looked in a 2-year, I think it was around about 2017-18 to 2019, average attendances at grounds dropped from about 29,000 to 20,000. That's a remarkable achievement in such a short time by cricket administrators. Just because you don't have any idea of what you're actually doing to, let's say, the game, but you're treating it as a product now in which we can just mass market. And the other thing about it is you are alienating the other side of people who may actually watch this game. You are saying this game is not for you if you're older and like Test cricket, but it's for young people. And we've got a whole lot of gimmicks here, and we've hooked up with circuses and so forth to bring in a type of entertainment that alienated the market. Cricket is one of the only games that alienated its market, and a core market who probably would have gone, as in the transition to one-day internationals, to watch shorter form of crickets. And there's one final point. Cricket is a remarkable shrinking game. It's managed to shrink itself from timeless test to a 3-hour block. And in that bastion of cricket, the United Arab Emirates, we're down to 10 overs, and you've given us 100. It's remarkable.
Thank you.
Just to add, if I could very quickly, on top of what Tom said, there's not much more to be said. But on the point around the media, in Australia, really the difference between a big sport and a small sport is the size of your media rights. We're a small population with a hell of a lot of professional leagues and clubs. The AFL and the NRL are absolutely in the haves. There's a bunch of have-nots. And Cricket Australia were desperate to stay a premium product and a premium sport. The media rights, the one before last, went for $500 million over 5 years. The Big Bash made up just $20 million of that per year. The next rights, they got $1.1 billion, and it was totally flipped on its head. The cash cow, the product that was wanted the most by Foxtel, the pay television provider, and Channel 7, the free-to-air provider, was Big Bash. It drove the media rights from 500 million to 1.1 billion, and it saved, cricket in many respects, or their market share. And so to Tom's point, while it was with Channel 10, while it was just a smaller component of the media rights, it became the 5th most attended sporting competition in the world, and it was averaging over a million viewers a night. That was quite extraordinary for a competition so young. And from that moment on, all chips in, where all the chips were placed in the middle of the room and on top of the BBL. And from there, it's been pushed forward, except, of course, when we have significant test series. For example, the one coming up, I don't think is going to get too many people excited, and Cricket Australia will lead lead with the Big Bash. It's different when there's an Ashes or even when we're playing India. So it's very interesting. And as for what happens next and whether there's an air of inevitability about these games arising in the reflection of society is something we have to see. But it certainly feels like the Cricket Australia has positioned the shortest form of the game as its leading cash cow going forward.
Can I ask Keshav to unmute and go ahead?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a quick question or make an observation and wanted to check if you agree. At least when it comes to cricket administration, right? I was under the impression that when it comes to England or Australia, they know what sport they are selling and to whom they are selling. In India, it seems to be pretty schizophrenic because let's take Test cricket in England, right? You know that the tickets are overpriced, but you still get houseful audiences attending cricket. And it's like they've picked an elite sport, almost like classical music, and you're catering it to a particular audience which wants to pay top money to watch it. Whereas when it comes to the Test cricket in India, it's almost as if we've lost sight of it. It comes from arguments which I have with my friends. Right, we've lost the last two home series at home pretty comprehensively to the South Africans and to the New Zealanders. And earlier this would have struck some kind of argument. The other thing that people would have, if they were really a discerning public, would be talking about the stadium experience when it comes to Test cricket, ODI cricket, T20 cricket, because in India, I don't know what the board is selling, because in any other country with a discerning public, people wouldn't be lining up to watch games after there are stampedes, after facilities are crap, after schedules don't get released. Like I'm visiting England this summer for the World Cup. I already have my tickets, whereas in India, it would have been hopeless until and unless I found someone to give me the tickets and buy it on black. So in India, it's just because of the numbers. And I'm not sure whether they are selling T20 to a particular crowd or whether they are selling cricket, because they clearly don't seem to be caring about Test cricket. So I just wanted to know if, my take on administration in these countries is accurate, and whether it's time to view Test cricket almost like classical music, where it's for a particularly elite audience and not for people to come in and attend.
But just briefly, without a doubt, they are selling to a particular audience in Australia, and that is people they consider young, kids and mothers and women, but women in particular, because the Big Bashes comes along and then all of a sudden you get the women's Big Bash, because they have created a market in women. 38% of women were watching the Big Bash. So, okay, let's increase that market with the WBBL, and then let's make it a standalone competition. And you had, at this time, one of the most interesting characters in Australian sport was Elise Perry, who I think at one point was the fifth most marketable sports person in Australia, because she was a dual international in football and cricket. And you could run on that. Now, Perry went to that women and particularly that girl market. The Big Bash has been picked out as being essentially for that demographic, and it's seen that demographic will be the future of cricket. So if that demographic is the future of cricket, is the Big Bash the future of cricket in Australia? And when you begin to read documents, they will say, well, the Big Bash will sustain Test cricket, but underneath it all, the Big Bash actually cannibalises Test cricket, or will begin to cannibalise Test cricket once it becomes, or once it increases its revenue share to Australia, Cricket Australia's coffers.
It's an excellent point, and I think what happened too is, and we talk about, Schumpeter and the idea of creative destruction. Cricket Australia created a new product for largely a new and different audience. They were concerned that they weren't attracting enough women to cricket games. They were concerned that they were losing, battles in junior sporting fields where kids were choosing other sports. And so this was very much a new and different form of the game that was emerging around the world, but packaged here in Australia to target a new and different audience to the audience that was going or attending and watching Test cricket at the time. And it was created very much in the mirror or reflection of society. Like most sports, there's not very many sports that have got longer. is there. Different rules are always introduced to sports to get to the point quicker. It makes Test cricket one of the most unique type of sports in the world. Big Bash isn't unique. This is what we're saying in our article. It's very common. It's 3 hours like most sports. It has a lot of flashpoints like most sports. It dresses up the razzle dazzle like most sports. It tries to get to the point and an outcome quickly like most sports. So it was following a template to attract women and children. Just like the American marketers told that Cricket Australia engaged with told them it would. And they told them how to do it. And it's happened. Now, the form of the cricket that suffered the most here in Australia, at least, is one-day internationals. That's the sport that's almost, or the form of the game that's drifted completely off into insignificance. Except, of course, for World Cups. And this is the next point about whether we promote Test cricket as classical music or not. What Cricket Australia does is recognise that we live in an event economy now. People love events, particularly here in Melbourne, where the sporting events capital of the world, apparently. But they promote events. The Ashes is an event. When India come and we play a 5-match series against them, it is an event. World Cups are events. So there are going to be events that, punctuate the cricket sporting calendar. But, the regular churn that attracts eyeballs to TV screens, that creates discussion in media, is increasingly around the Big Bash. That's why it's been positioned at the front. It's like the league, the Football League, that gives you a consistent audience, that gives you a consistent platform to sell and to make money from. And so that's how it's been playing out. And I think that's how it will play out in the future.
I'll just jump into with one little fact here. In 2016, speaking of classical music, Cricket Australia signed a marketing contract with Nickelodeon, and that should tell you a lot about its audience.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you both. John Reed, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Thank you. And I just wanted to address one area that Tom and Sam, in their really interesting presentation and comments, have raised a number of times, but not necessarily centrally. And that is, what, if anything, is the relationship between highly organized and marketed forms of cricket, like Big Bash League, between that and the participation of children in informal sport, for backyard cricket or whatever. And my sense is that, while I defer to other colleagues who may know more about it than me, having spent some time in India, that informal participation in cricket of people at all ages is enormous, perhaps at the expense of hockey over the past 30, 40, 50 years, but certainly for cricket has created a massive base for the sport. Now, I'm not necessarily implying that makes it any easier for children to make their way into the highest paid forms of the sport, but the base of children's cricket is there. And if I can draw on another sport, which happens to be one I'm familiar with, if you look at hockey, in this case ice hockey in Canada, it too has become enormously commercialized in recent decades. And associated with that, whatever cause and effect may be, there also has been a decline in pond hockey, street hockey, and children's participation has become very much, perhaps driven by parents, towards access to elite forms with expensive equipment and the possibility of big money. So I guess my question is, in Australian cricket, what kind of dynamic is working here with children's informal cricket? And I suppose, as part of that, the to the boy or girl who is at the Big Bash League game and is upset because of a particular result, are they likely the next day, if it's a weekend, to be going out and playing backyard cricket or playground cricket or whatever? Or are the two becoming very much separated?
I was just trying to find some figures actually, John. And on top of the Big Bash, participation rates did increase in kids cricket. It became, according to Cricket Australia, the most participated sport in Australia. Now, that may be a long bow given the high participation rates in soccer in this country, but certainly there's an interesting aspect when it comes to informal cricket in Australia, and that is the South Asian population will play very much an informal game that goes into parks and plays at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and will play anything from 4 overs to 20 over cricket. And one of the reasons for this is the job economy in which they work, and another reason is that they wish to keep their culture through cricket. They're working in restaurants, they're driving taxis, they're just in that gig economy, and this fits in with how they play. Now, Cricket Australia want to tap into that market. They see that as a form of cricket that they don't have any say in. And the other thing is municipal councils also want to control that market because they're using municipal resources, such as cricket grounds. So, yeah, that is on top of that high participation rate. You've also got this informal cricket economy that has its own informal competitions that some of these competitions play for prize money. Now, that is completely outside the formal structure of Australian cricket, and something that Cricket Australia are very keen to get hold of, but really can't.
And just quickly, I'll add, yes, there's absolutely a link between the Big Bash and the junior forms of the game. I've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. The 8-year-old's just gone through Cricket Blast. The Blasters program is the introductory program into cricket. And you are asked to choose your favourite team, and you get sent a shirt with your favourite team. Now, you can choose a Big Bash team or you can choose Australia. All the kids are running around out there in their Big Bash team colours. But here's the thing. My son, we live in Melbourne. There are two Melbourne teams, the Melbourne Stars and the Melbourne Renegades. My son barracks for the Hobart Hurricanes because he likes purple and thought the name Hurricanes was very cool. I took him to Hobart on a father-son weekend. We went and watched the Melbourne Stars play Hobart, assuming that, this would consolidate his, support for the Melbourne Stars. But he left as a Hobart Hurricanes fan and has been a Hobart Hurricanes fan ever since. That's by the by. I guess the point is the connection between the junior cricket and the Big Bash, and what kids are interested in. They're more likely to be tugging on their parents' shirt saying, take me to the MCG, to the Big Bash, rather than take me to a full day of test cricket. So I guess from a Cricket Australia's perspective, it's working. This is why they embarked on it. They were worried they were losing this audience, this share. They were worried that participation at the junior levels was decreasing. So it has had an impact there, and the junior competitions are very popular and numbers very healthy. So, it is interesting that, I guess they embarked on this, and Australia's not unique, to try and capture an audience that wanted shorter, sharper, more entertaining, forms of the game, which has had a positive impact on participation. So yes, it is. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that. Rodney.
Yeah, well, I hope we still have time. If everyone's happy, I don't have so much a question as a comment, potentially a rant. So do shut me down if it moves too much in the latter direction. A major source of frustration for me, and I've aired it here before, is that even those who fret most about cricket's future, those who are leery of the developments you've described, those who regard cricket as more than merely a product, those in short whom we expect to be most hostile or skeptical of what Chris Macmillan, a previous speaker in the series, has called media cricket. And those people speak without a moment's hesitation of the unmitigated good that is growing the game. You know, one sees the phrase everywhere. It's repeated like a mantra. We speak more as if we were Wall Street investors than participants in a culture. Certainly, no one speaks of authentic culture in terms of growth. Cricket's ultimate aspiration, at least, the aspiration of those who speak in this manner, seems to be to become part of the monoculture. And the only way it can do that, of course, is to make the game as broad as possible. That is to strip away everything those who don't like cricket find alienating. That's what T20 is designed to do. And on those terms, it's been very successful. And yet many of the same growth-hungry people speak also about the importance of preserving or conserving the traditional or the heritage format. Test cricket. It strikes me as the merest truism. I mean, it's no secret to anyone who has the slightest concern for ecology that growth and conservation are very often directly in conflict. You know, if Test cricket is what you want to conserve, you probably can't do that while growing the game. T20 is the growth vehicle, and the more T20 grows, I think the evidence of the last 20 years makes this another truism. The more T20 grows, the more tenuous Test cricket becomes. And that's why I think these privatized franchise models so often look like the answer to the very problems they cause. Rant over.
Oh yeah, Roddy, you've nailed it. You've got this nonsense about the Australian cricket calendar. It's all about, we'll squeeze in the tests sometimes, start them in November, and we'll take them through to January, so as we can get them over with before the Big Bash hots up and we move into the finals, and the Big Bash will take over the January market. Nobody realises, or they do realise it, but they just hide it by saying this is sustaining Test cricket because it's giving us money for growth, that it's actually cannibalising the cricket calendar. It's already cannibalised one format of the game, which is almost played in winter. The one-day fixtures are just almost during the football finals these days. It is in every document hidden away in one or two sentences that T20 cricket is the future of cricket. And we made a decision back in the early 2000s when Indian Premier League came along and franchise cricket came along that this was the model, and we tripped over it. Marketers tripped over to get to America to see how to do it properly. And if you've ever sat through an NFL game on a snowy day, you just freeze to death and you freeze in boredom. And that's what's happening with the Big Bash. It's just the McDonaldisation of cricket, and all complexity has been taken out.
Well, I think, Rodney, you just summarised the current state of play and status quo perfectly. And I mean, it really essentially touches on all of those themes we explored in our paper in Sport Ethics and Philosophy. And the bigger picture is, I guess, why does it matter if the future of the sport is 2020 cricket? Like, what is lost? And I think it's, this is what we argued, that sport should be more than entertainment. People might disagree. People might say they're simply happy to be entertained mildly or even furiously for 3 hours. But there's a great many others that argue that sport should be more. It should offer variety. It should offer a variety in conditions, in styles of play that are often dictated by traditions and conditions and societal cultures and norms. That means it might not necessarily be overtly obvious, but there are subtle differences in the playing styles of different teams in different countries based on a range of, nuanced differences. Where is that in 2020 cricket? Where is that in the Big Bash, where the aim of the game is to basically flatten out the pitches to the point where it's a road to encourage fours, sixes, which lead to pyrotechnics, music, flashing lights, and a bunch of people going, look at that. But the complexity is gone. That variety, that intellectual stimulation of us watching it. Can people now handle watching a sport without a flashlight or a fork in the road moment every 5 minutes? Because you can watch Test cricket and it can be absolutely enthralling, but after an hour, you look up at the score and you look at how many wickets haven't been taken, and many might bash 2020 cricket. So that we debate these things and wonder aloud and stretch our brains to wonder what the future will bring, but also I think to challenge ourselves on the question of what ought to be. Like, what do we want the future to be? And why? And they're deep questions. They're philosophical questions sometimes, but they're important questions. What do we think the future ought to be? The future of cricket. You have to be somewhat or a little pragmatic, because we do live in a world of, commercialization and commodification, and, we're not necessarily going to change that asunder. But, there are deeper questions here of what the future of sport, and I would even argue even more broadly what the future of culture, our culture is, because it's all looking very standardized, very formulaic, all the same. And we are told by marketers, no, it's different, it's fantastic, it's exciting, you don't know what's going to happen next. Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. And so that's what makes it all very interesting as well.
Sam, Tom, I think we probably need to draw things to a close there, unless anybody has a final burning point they want to raise. It's been a brilliant hour and a quarter, and I think we can hear your passion, which I'm sure pretty much everybody, well, I'm sure everybody on the call shares. But I think also what's been so great, and the way you've presented it and what you've written in your articles it's just so insightful and so helpful for thinking about making sense of what it is that we see, obviously in Australia, but I think what we are seeing at the moment in England. So for that, I'm really grateful, and I'm sure everybody else would like to thank you for sparing your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to join you. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody that's been on the call. And please look out for the next online talk. I don't know, Rodney, what's the next one? We got something coming up shortly.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me. I'll bring it up right now. Let's see. Oh, our next one, of course, is Namal, who is on the call. He'll be talking to us about the early history of cricket in Ceylon or Sri Lanka.
6th of June.
6th of June at 10 o'clock British Standard Time.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, goodbye. Everybody has a good day.